I'm not going to be in the way at all here.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
So, John Ashcroft came to the panel today. Before we Attorney General Bush, and I was hosting to him for CPR, but he just disconnected flight, so I didn't get this. It's okay, I was hosting to you.
That would have been really exciting. So you just like moving in.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. By the way, my name is Kat. I'm the Vice Chair of Education for the NEC. If you have any complaints about the process or you have concerns about what happened today, email me at education@penn-nec.org. Thanks for coming.
I know probably offends you.
Okay, so as Kat mentioned, we're going to get started with the debate now. I do have a gavel. I prefer not to use it if possible. As she mentioned, my name's Alec. I'm a representative from the NEC. I'll be the moderator today. I'm just keeping time.
Hi everyone, I'm Mia. I'm co-chair of PRISM, and since today's debate is Advocacy Center, I'm representing the groups with today's questions.
So, in the interest of time, because we started a little bit behind last time, we'll jump right in. But first, I would just like to remind people of the rules. First of all, I'd like to say that I didn't get to mention last time, they do a lot of hard work preparing, so to the extent that we could be respectful and quiet while they're answering, that would be fantastic. We'll be starting out with questions from our co-sponsors, the advocacy groups that Mia mentioned. After about 30 minutes of that, we'll allow you, the audience, to ask questions. Mia will have the ability to take those. You just raise your hand, she'll call on you and ask the question. We'll only be entertaining questions that are kind and professional, and also are those that allow both candidates to respond. We don't want them directed at one in particular. Another quick note, based on feedback from last time, questions will be given priority that are asked by undergraduate students, as this is the undergraduate assembly debate. And the second piece that I would like to ask from you guys, what was the second piece?
Rick Perry.
Oh yes, try to make it not too specific to inner workings of the undergraduate assembly. Please make sure that these are questions that all students can understand, whether or not they may be super into PSG or not. So the format will be 1 minute opening statement from the candidates. We'll go into questions, then 1 minute closing statement. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions, and then a 30-second rebuttal. Who did we start with last time for the opening statement? Okay, so why don't you start this time?
Yeah, sure. Start now.
Yeah.
Great. Hello everyone. My name is Cortes, and I am running for UA Vice President. Currently, I am a warden and sophomore. I am also the Civic and Philadelphia Engagement Committee Director of the UA, which was appointed by the Executive Board, and that is a cabinet position. So due to that position, I've been able to really understand the Vice President role through my work with other cabinet members, through the work of steering, through the work of organizations. I'm also really involved in a lot of minority organizations. I'm involved heavily with the Lambda Alliance. I sit on the board, on the executive board. I'm also very involved with admissions, Penn Preview Days. So if you have any questions pertaining to those types of things, you can definitely ask them. But my platform's online, and I'll definitely be able to answer some questions.
Equally as so, my platform's online as well. You can look that up. Just Google my name. It'll come up right as the first thing. I want to say one thing before I get cut off. I want to respond to a recent article by the DP that sort of put my campaign into question. It talked about the largest of my particular ideals. And if you go through my policies, you see some issues that I'd like to sort of do that are pretty grand. I want to start with a quote from Robert Kennedy. If this world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of the imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease. If there's anything that defines this campaign, it is the debate between the status quo and what I see as an imaginative future, a way for student government to be a bit more a part of student life. If that is the student government that you wish to see, that is the kind I offer.
Cut you off there. Thank you.
Okay, so our first question for the vice presidential candidates comes from PQ, Penn Consortium of London. What are your plans to address female leadership, especially in the UA?
that Gabe?
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Sure. So we've actually had, and we actually, this year we're going to have a few more, looks like we're going to have a few more women on the undergraduate assembly. But the issue has been prevalent, and since Cynthia Ip, last year, who was the speaker, left, we just had Joyce Kim, a part of the executive board. I think it starts from the top down. We have to have exec be a more active part in reaching out to groups like PCUW that do great work, but that also offer a great pool of young, ambitious women who want to be active and who want to promote the female cause. I think that's something that we can sort of start with by going to those groups, talking with them, and speaking to their leaders, and having 2 or 3 people perhaps run at the beginning of the year as student representatives who are also women, and make them a more active part of the undergraduate assembly.
Yeah, so I definitely already have experience with working with women who are in leadership positions. For example, I'll call out my friend Dawn Andrew-Fee, who's a chair of Lambda Alliance, and so that these are positions that I really work closely with. Also, I've actually recruited a couple of people in the UA for positions of women leadership, including Kaylee Zinner, who is a freshman who's running. But also, not only that, I think the problem really lies not so much on how the UA approaches these organizations or these particular individuals, but actually how to embrace women leadership within PQ itself. I think it's really important to increase the intersectionality of feminism within the cultural groups on campus, and I think that's a huge issue, that really there isn't a lot of feminist activism on campus, and to be able to have PQ in these organizations included in 5E conversations and included in cultural conversations is going to be really key to increasing women leadership on campus.
I just respond with saying that we just have more feminist events. I think that's an important element of it too. But I think the focus in terms of moving into the undergraduate assembly is that element of recruiting. Right? It has to start with certain groups on campus that we have to isolate as female oriented, and we have to approach them and say, bring some of the advocacy issues through the UA, and in a way, pass them through the UA so that we can make that issue of advocacy much more a vibrant part. And by that factor, promote women and other issues.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question comes from Prism. Due to Penn's secular affiliation, many religious groups feel marginalized, particularly in terms of access to university resources. Recently, the UA Vice President has served as a major avenue for accessing the administration to address these issues. What steps, if any, do you plan to take to ensure that this strong relationship continues?
So it's very evident. I'll share a small anecdote that people in steering can express and share with y'all. Last night, the executive vice president came to speak to steering, and there was a comment, quote, that Benjamin Franklin would, we definitely want Benjamin Franklin's motto of the intersectionality of PRISM and the religious organizations to be apparent on campus. And I think starting with having a religious resource center at the that is not at the bottom of a basement, and to really emphasize that these issues relating to religious groups are really emphasized, including the Jewish community have issues with during particular Jewish events and religious days, where they can't actually be able to walk through hallways because of the motion sensors that are in place, and we really need to move towards improving residential life for these organizations, and also increasing accessibility of religious funds for religious organizations, and also...
Kevin, I have to cut you off there. Thank you.
Just 2 things. One, I don't think when it comes to, so asking for more money is always something that we can do, and so religious funds are great in terms of expanding them, but I don't know what the possibility of that is, especially with austerity being an issue. The second, in terms of actually answering the question, I think one thing you have to do is, I'd like to see more respect for Muslim student organizations like MSA. They've been trying to focus on expanding prayer opportunities for Muslim students, the same way we respect the prayer days of Yom Kippur for Jewish students. We should respect Ramadan. We should respect some of the other Muslim holidays, maybe Christian holidays as well, in order to not only foster more dialogue, but to foster more respect on campus for those particular groups.
Yeah, I definitely like to agree with, we really need to foster these communities that are being marginalized. There really is this lack of funding for these organizations, and the issues pertinent to these organizations are not really being listened. And I think that it really goes down to working with the fundamental issues, including the residential living situation, accessibility to proper dietary restrictions, and increasing options in food and the different dining halls to ensure that these needs are met for the religious organizations.
Okay, our next question comes from Skew. One of the goals of the college house system is to foster an intellectual community. What initiatives would you take to help carry out this vision?
When it comes to an intellectual community, I think in the college house, I live in Ware, and there's no doubt that the college house program, when it comes to residential programs, it has failed, and I'll say that openly, and I think most people would agree with that. I think it starts with talking to people like Marty Redmond, who runs Chaz, the college house services, and essentially working with him on how we can maybe reform the way people think of academic issues in college houses themselves. We can't just be focused on residential programs. I don't think that try to be as inclusive, because here's why. At the end of the year, most people tend to go in a bunch of different directions. So how do you keep freshmen more active? I think you give them incentives by even working through the groups that they already work through on campus, and sort of bringing back whatever they learn into part of that same group, and almost mandating it in a way.
But I'm going to have to cut you off there. Thank you.
Do you mind quickly repeating the question, please?
Sure. One of the goals of the college house system is to foster an intellectual community. What initiatives would you take to help carry out this vision?
Right. So I definitely think that one of Penn's strongest systems is the residential college system and the residential programs, and I think that increasing that accessibility for different different types of educational learning systems in the college house system is really key to why Penn students do remain in the college houses. But I also want to ensure that there are opportunities for different minority organizations and different international students. So there's a lack of service for these international students who don't have cohesive communities within the college house system. And I really think that increasing those communities will also increase the intellectual environment that are within their college house systems and the residential programs.
I'm going to have to disagree with the fact that the residential programs are as effective as they are. I don't think they are at all. I think that's something that both Marty Redmond and Chaz have already come out and said. I think there has to be a broad sort of upheaval when it comes to our understanding of residential programs on a general basis. I think in part the issue stems from lack of participation at the end of the year. I think that has to do more with RAs and GAs and sort of keeping the same level of interest by freshmen and by the residents throughout the course of the year.
Our next question comes from the Political Coalition. What are two serious issues that you see on campus that are negatively affecting political groups and advocacy? What are two concrete steps you would take to improve both political advocacy on campus if elected vice president?
That's me, right?
Or no,
it's
actually Christian.
All right. So the one fundamental issue with political organizations on campus is really the accessibility, one, of funding, and also the accessibility to be able to collaborate. Right now there aren't clear guidelines on exactly how the student organizations should be collaborating with political organizations. So I really want to emphasize that these guidelines are really clear and to work towards extracting that information that we already have to be able to utilize it and form really a lot better guidelines and more accessible guidelines for student organizations to be able to collaborate to increase this political discourse on campus that is well needed. I don't think that political groups should be oppressed in expressing opinions. I think it's extremely important that these types of conversations happen, and that we can definitely achieve that through having clearer guidelines and guidelines that are a little bit more lenient on this political organizations to increase this political dialogue that's well needed.
I think you'll find it very hard pressed to do just that, to have the administration change or make the guidelines a little bit more lenient, because they're so desperately clinging to their 501c status when they're tax exempt. But there are guidelines that already exist that actually allow us to work within those particular set of rules that will allow us to have political funding in place. The problem is getting the university to actually do that. So yes, funding is an issue, I totally agree, and collaboration is the other. When it comes to funding, I think that's just a matter of having really good research and making the case to the administrators that other schools do this. And in terms of collaboration, I think you want to work with groups that are like the Penn Dems, that are like the College Republicans, and then mix them with advocacy groups so you can have educational events, not necessarily political partisan events, so you can get the university to focus on the educational aspect, not on the partisan aspect, thus provide more funding.
I'm gonna have to disagree with part of what we just said. I definitely think that last night was a really good indication that there is political funding available for students, and I think that wasn't really clear before. And I think that if we're able to really set out these clear guidelines, there are guidelines in place at the moment, but they're not necessarily clear as they should. And once those guidelines are clear, we can really assess them, be able to make them a little bit more effective for student organizations. And so these political organizations can really be able to have the conversations that they need and be able to increase political funding on campus.
Okay, the next question comes from Lambda Alliance. How do you both plan to be an ally to the Lambda Alliance and other 5B organizations with regard to the Faculty Diversity Action Plan?
That's me? Okay, all right. When it comes to faculty diversity, I mean, we obviously passed the Diversity Action Plan, and we saw this year that there was a big issue with the promotion of Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, who was really not in keeping with any level of different diversity than we've already seen. I think, again, that has to do much more with advocacy when it comes to approaching the administrators themselves. You have to keep them honest about this issue. You have to remind them constantly, and that includes dialogue with administrators, that includes hosting events, that includes using the DP as an instrument of publicizing how little we have in terms of diversity with LGBT faculty and administrators. And so it's a process of marketing. We have the rules in place. Now let's market the issue, let's publicize it, and you get the administration hopefully to move on it.
Yeah, I would most definitely agree with that point. Sitting on the Lambda Alliance board, it's really evident that there isn't enough faculty diversity for queer individuals, and I think that really the work is done by the Lambda Alliance and through the work that we do in the LGBT Center. And I think that collaborating with the UA and being vice president, working with these other constituent organizations to make it that information more available, that there really isn't this diversity apparent in the administration, is going to be really key to letting administrators know that this is an issue on campus and that we really need to move towards increasing diversity, not only for the LGBT community, but all the different communities that are misrepresented on campus.
I would agree in full.
One brief reminder, we are in a public audience and we are being recorded. Things that were said off the record in steering meetings, I would encourage continue to stay off the record. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Our next question comes from the Transfer Student Organization. Last year, both of you were on the UA. At that time, the proposal to have a specific UA transfer seat codified into the UA due to specific issues with new member elections was raised, and the UA, particularly the executive board, looked favorably upon it. However, this year, both of you were instrumental in shutting down the initiative. Can you speak more to the thought process that you had to help make transfer representation on the UA much harder to obtain, with the knowledge that there have only been 2 transfer student representatives on the UA within the last 7 years? Starting with Christian.
Right. So I can't particularly say that I rejected the transfer seat for the UA, but I can definitely say that there has been a great number of representation of the transfer students on the UA, and we can definitely improve that. I think that the work of Nikolai Zabertov and Eric Reuner has really improved the situation with transfer students, and the formation of the Transfer Student Association, the Transfer Student Organization, has really improved this dialogue, and I really want to work towards increasing that representation by really making issues visible, such as the lack of transfer representation within the residential system. I think that transfer students really are not represented. When they come to Penn, they they're given a dining plan and they're put into the freshman class, and they don't really have a community to be able to foster discussion and have a community of their own. So I really want to work towards having maybe a residential program that will improve the life of transfer students and the efforts that the Transfer Student Organization has been able to accomplish thus far.
Right, well I think no seat is guaranteed. We're sitting right here because we want the same position. No seat is guaranteed at all in the UA. I think we have just reservations for different schools because we want the diversity of different schools. But when it comes to different student organizations, that would set a precedent, right? That every single student group, if they're not represented well or if they don't have as many positions as they probably should automatically get a seat on the UA. I don't think that that's the right course of action. I think, again, the issue is more systemic. I think the issue is inclusion. I think the issue can probably be solved by a more advanced and a more active UA executive that promotes transfer students to run for different positions at different points of the year. I don't think that you necessarily have to promise any seat to anyone. I think you just have to be a bit more active when it comes to advocacy on campus.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that requiring seats for certain organizations or certain types of groups on campus would just really start running into this issue of, okay, which groups and what type of communities should be represented most definitely, but it's all about information and increasing accessibility and making sure that these groups are represented by our own work of recruiting these members onto the UA rather than actually having a placeholder for them, so I would agree.
Okay, a question from the United Minorities Council. What kind of work or initiatives have you individually done with the UMC or other 5B groups? Starting with Gabe.
So I've not worked particularly with UMC, but with other 5B groups, certainly I've worked with recently with APSC to sort of see if there are ways to expand the Asian American program. This is one issue that I think I'll be promoting for the next year if I can. But we don't have a major right now for Asian American Studies, and yet we've had in Asian American Studies, ASAM, we've had a minor for about 10 years, or a little bit more than that. We'd be the third Ivy League school to have one, should we create one, and we just passed, this past week, a Native American Studies resolution to create a minor and to create essentially a department for Native Americans. It's interesting. But I think in terms of creating a major, that would be a huge moment for the Asian American community on campus, which represents more than 20% of the student body, and I think requires the same level of academic attention as any other.
I have to cut you off there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really say, I mean, most of my involvements on campus are really within the minority groups. Like I said, I sit on Lambda Line and also coaching QPen. QPen's actually this week, so we released our supplement. We actually had a keynote this past weekend. Yes, supplement was great, thank you. We actually had a keynote event this last week, this Sunday, with Janet Mock, who is a trans woman of color, and that was a speaker that I really helped bring on campus, and that really helps intersect all the different communities. We had co-sponsorships with UMC, with APSC, we had co-sponsorships with the other 5D organizations, PQ. I really want to ensure, and Lambda and the QPen board really want to ensure that these types of conversations are happening that aren't already happening on campus. And I've really done a lot of work in these communities.
The final issue I'll say that I've worked on is with the Latino Coalition again recently. I've done most of my work on the issue of undocumented immigrants when it comes to writing. I've written 2 articles for PPR, Mother of Exiles, and From Polls to Policy, which is the feature article of the recent edition. And that focuses more on the issue of undocumented immigrants. Now I want to move the issue now to the UA. I want to make it more a part of student advocacy and representing a group on campus that has not been discussed at all by anyone.
Okay. The Assembly of International Students asks, how would you plan to increase socioeconomic diversity for both domestic and international students? Christian.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. How would you plan to increase socioeconomic diversity for both domestic and international students?
Right. So, I mean, this is definitely a key issue with admissions, and so I actually sit on the Admission Deans Advisory Board, which Eric Furta sits on as well. And so we've actually had these conversations about what is socioeconomic diversity. I've actually been called by the DP to be able to talk about these issues because I really think it's prevalent. I think that a lot of people don't consider the issues pertinent to groups and minority groups that are affected by a lot of the privilege that we do see on this campus. And I think it's really important to be able to bring those types of conversations up to admissions and to not only admissions but also the Daily Pennsylvania, which speaks about these things, and really steering and all these organizations to ensure that people are aware of it and that it becomes more visible. And it again goes to this point of increasing conversation, dialogue, discourse on these types of issues and talking to the right administrators that are relevant to these issues.
Sure. Okay. I think there are three different points you can take on this. One is geography, is where exactly are the students coming from, right? Within the inner city, without the inner city, and neighborhoods and not healthy neighborhoods. Two is familial history. Do the parents, do brothers, sisters go to college as well? Because we want to expand opportunities for people who otherwise have not been given those opportunities, who don't have who don't come from backgrounds from which they can sort of easily flow into these really nice situations and go to Penn. And then the final is probably the easiest of them all, which is how much money the actual parents make and how much money the family takes in. I think given consideration to all those, to each of those three issues, you can expand socioeconomic diversity on campus, and you can really, really bring emphasis to the issue of diversity as it pertains not just to race, but to where people come from and to class.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely agree with that. Just another point I'd like to touch on is actually, I'm actually a Posse Plus scholar. You might be familiar with the Posse program. So this is a program that really tries to include individuals from inner city areas and also individuals from underrepresented minorities to come to college together as a group of students to be able to help each other with the college experience due to maybe a lack of socioeconomic privilege. And I really want to ensure that these types of programs continue at Penn because they actually have been eliminating them. And again, this is really key to admissions, and my connections with the admissions officers is really key to be able to increase these types of things. Yeah.
Okay. Our next question comes from the Latino Coalition. Both candidates claim the UA should take a more proactive role in terms of advocacy. They should take into account practical measures as well as shifting the UA culture itself in a different path. What are some immediate steps in this direction? Beginning with Gabe.
Undocumented immigrants. I'm gonna keep promoting that issue because I said that I would, and I said, and it still to me is the primary issue. I come from a family that came here to this country legally and through a very nice, easy process, but it was very, very hard. Over the course of 30 to 40 years, my family came here. And I'm going to say openly, my uncle in Florida, he employs people who are illegal in his own supermarket, and they're good people. And their children deserve to go to school, they deserve to go to college. There are kids here who are undocumented and deserve to have every single right, privilege that you all have, that I have. And so we don't really talk about them. We talk about a lot of other minority groups, but they are a true minority. You don't even know about them because they are a true minority. And so I want to bring light to this issue. And that's the first issue that I would probably bring up. A discussion paper and then possibly resolution on how we can actually create a cohesive community of undocumented immigrants and then promote the university career programs to help them.
I think this is definitely undocumented students as an issue. However, I think the DP survey really showed that UA students don't really want the UA to be necessarily talking about national policy, but I think it's really important to address these issues more on the student level and just be able to foster a community within Penn of undocumented students to be able to build a coalition and bring more dialogue and transparency to this community, and to have a support system here at the university, and to ensure that issues pertaining to undocumented students aren't forgotten by the general student body.
Right, so there's an organization called Penn for Immigrant Rights, which sort of does that already, and there are certain groups on campus that you'd see undocumented immigrants probably be a part of, but I think when it comes to fostering the dialogue, that's a key element for the next year. I think the year after that, we focused on what the university can do to expand opportunities in work study that are more Penn-based and studying abroad, even though you can't actually go outside the country. What is an equivalent for undocumented immigrants?
So we'll now be opening it up to questions that haven't been submitted. We do have 4 more questions that have been submitted, but as promised, we would switch at about the half hour. So if you have any question of the candidates, keep in mind the guidelines I mentioned earlier, which I think are pretty lenient. Raise your hand, Mia will call on you, and as soon as those are exhausted, we'll move back into co-sponsor questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Where do you see advocacy and saying that the UA comes out for certain rights and certain movements in the everyday Penn student's life?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I think that these are national policy issues that are really important, and definitely sometimes, or most of the time, are policies that my personal opinions are aligned with. However, I definitely think that these issues shouldn't necessarily be addressed by the undergraduate assembly unless they're pertinent to the students and the issues that are relevant to the students in particular. So like Gabe mentioned, the issues with undocumented students studying abroad, those types of issues should be addressed rather than talking about undocumented students and like, or not undocumented students, but possibly Democratic or Democrat-Republican issues that aren't necessarily relevant to the student body, but rather to the political platforms of the Penn Dems or the college Republicans, to ensure that there really isn't these policies discussed in the U.S. In the UA, but rather the issues that are relevant to student organizations and how we could really meet those needs of issues.
Okay. Well, I think there needs to be a separation between the understanding of national policy and social policy. National policy, I'm not trying to pass any laws here. That was never the point, and I don't think the DP did a very good job of explaining that to people when they were doing their particular poll. But when it comes to social policy, it comes to, the question is advocacy for people on campus who otherwise don't have someone to speak for their particular group. And when it comes to that, I think we have a responsibility to do so because they elect us, right? I would think. The last is when it comes to sexual violence, when it comes to anti-bullying, when it comes to undocumented immigrants. Those are three key areas which we haven't even discussed. I've also been working with APSC to maybe promote an anti-bullying program in Philadelphia high schools. That's something that the UA can actually be working on right now that would create tangible change and clear change in Philadelphia, which is in keeping with the Civic and Philadelphia engagement community, which Christian chairs.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the work that the Civic and Philadelphia Engagement Committee has really done with the working with CHAC, which is the Civic House, and these organizations to increase the oppressions that are relevant in the school system in West Philadelphia. I think that there are a lot of issues pertaining to microaggression in schools. And I think that to be able to address these issues by implementing the anti-bullying programs, which are things that we've talked about on CP, and to actually make these projects more formalized and crystallized. And also, yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because I meet a lot of, as a freshman, I meet a lot of freshmen who really want to get into academic research and aren't able to because almost all research requires prior experience. So my question is, how will you promote someone who's getting into academic research and really wants to do it, but there's not very many opportunities?
Can I just ask some follow-up questions to clarify? Sure. What particular types of academic research is it?
It can be in really any of the, so like sciences, humanities, so really all of the departments.
Sure. Well, I think well, look, I think your first resource is CURF, the Center for Undergraduate Research and Fellowships. That's first resource. But I think the other is to get on listservs for the actual departments that you're interested in. For example, with political science, I know 2 or 3 students from the Penn International Affairs Association, which is the model UN group on campus, freshmen who've gotten really great research opportunities this summer working with foreign policy schools and certain research institutions in Washington. And they get that really by being just on the listserv of the political science department or the international affairs department. So I would say educating freshmen as they're coming in on how to get these particular research fellowships. If you're interested from a very start, I think working through a program like the Benjamin Franklin Scholars, which provide a really great opportunity for freshmen to do so, is one thing. 2, I think really educating them on how to actually get this research by being a part of these listservs, and you get pretty much an email almost every day about different opportunities.
Sorry. Thank you. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with everything that Gabe pointed out. It's definitely what I would have said. I think that it really is a problem of learning about the resources that are available. There are many listservs that you can join. I'm a part of many different listservs, including like the Common Good listserv, which really advises students on different international opportunities and academic research programs. And so these are resources available that you can actually be able to have PR campaigns that will educate students on making this information more available. And again, like I just definitely agree with everything that he really nailed down nailed it on that one. Yeah.
I just want to add also, because I know I wanted to say one more thing, is the element of teachers and the actual advisors. So this is something I've tried to work on with Next Generation Student Systems as a board I stand on, or I sit on. And one thing that we wanted to do was have advisors be much more active in, peer advisors and pre-academic advisors be much more active in telling students from the get-go, if you want to do research, these are the actual programs that we have. I'll connect you with this and that person, and that's something that can be fixed from the bottom up.
Any other questions from the audience?
So from experience or your own research in preparing for your positions, what have been some major turning points in the course of student activism in Penn's campus, and where do you see it going?
I think that there has been this move towards not talking about issues because we don't want to be partisan, and I think that's a huge issue because I think that partisan, not all issues are partisan related, and we really need to be able to make that clarification between what's partisan and what's not partisan, and to increase activism that is clearly important to many of the minority organizations that are on campus, and to be able to collaborate with organizations. This goes back to this issue of the political organizations that can't collaborate with some of the 5B organizations because of political associations. And we need to make sure that it's clear of what types of issues we can talk about, and to ensure that these conversations can happen and activism should be increased on campus through the different cultural weeks that we have, and increasing the diversity of the events in the cultural week with political advocacy and collaborations with political groups.
Sure. Okay, so I think one of the major changing points was support for the Dreamers bill that never passed in 2010. That was a couple years ago. The year, I think, before Christian and I got here. That was a big turning point. And I think that made it about advocacy on a much, much larger scale, right? And then there's also, in our freshman year, the divestment from anti-fracking institutions like PNC. The university has not followed up with that. And I know that, and it's unfortunate that they haven't, and that's their own fault. But I think where it goes from here, I think one issue that Landa's really worked on quite well is not divestment, but making sure that for future contracts that we have with people who provide services for the university, that they include elements of diversity when it comes to LGBT, gender equality, gender identity equality, and sexual orientation when it comes to this describing how they employ people. I think that's something that the university can do when it comes and signs contracts with new employers that work with the university.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that Atlanta Lies has worked on these activist issues, and I think the other 5B organizations have been working on activism issues. I just think really the issue is not so much working on these issues, but to be able to increase the amount of issues that can be discussed and that can be addressed. I think that, I definitely think that the organizations are hitting a brick wall where these conversations cannot happen because of the political climate at Penn, and to be able to increase that political climate and to be able to increase this political discourse will really funnel into activism, because a lot of activism is through political conversation. Yes?
All right, so is there are 3 more? Okay, oh boy. Okay, so let's take those 3 more questions. We won't take the go back into these, so we could give Abe his full time, because he kind of got cut off at the last debate. So that's Dawn. I apologize, I don't know the other 2 questioners, but why don't we start with Dawn and then go next, and then we'll work our way to the back of the room if that's okay.
Yeah. So a lot of this debate has been focused on collaboration with student groups. What do you see your role as the vice president being with relation to how you collaborate with groups, how you approach groups, or whether you let groups approach you?
Sure. I think it's a combination of both. It's about finding balance, right? I think you wanna allow student groups to approach you in their own time when they're ready. At the same time, when you see issues that are clear, there's no issue with the vice president or the president going and talking with the chairs of these student groups and saying, hey, where are we on this? Can we see some kind of a discussion here? Can we see some kind of resolution possibly on these issues? Why is it being stuck in a certain place? And so this constant tug of war between sort of staticness and activity when it comes to actual resolutions, I think is a proper balance. But I think the question is appropriate because you don't want to be too active as vice president. You want to facilitate, and that would be my job in chief, and that's what I would be sort of doing. I would never ask a student to do something that they're not comfortable doing.
Right. It's really not about imposing on the organizations your political beliefs, but rather to work with the organizations and the issues that are relevant to them, and to ensure that you're meeting with the organizations and seeing what issues are really pressing. So, for example, with like the Preferred Names Initiative, that was a project that Lambda Alliance came to the UA and was concerned about, and it's something that we were approached by. We should also be proactive in approaching them, but not to really take on our own projects on the UA that are relevant to these organizations, but rather to ensure that those issues that are being talked to the UA are being consulted by the organizations by inviting them and by ensuring that they're on board with what we're saying and to advocate for the issues that are relevant to them.
So I think there's a consensus that the UA hasn't gotten done what it's needs to gotten done in the recent past, and that some people in picking candidates have tried to decide who can work well with the existing administration. And so my question for you guys is, what do you think is more important to the UA, unity or efficacy?
Efficacy, without a doubt.
Sorry,
Is
being
it
a
my turn?
Christian.
All right, fine, here you go. Well, you know my answer. There you go.
I think they're both definitely important. However, I would have to say that the cohesion is more important, just because the effect of the executive body, the executive board, and the fact that there was no cohesion this past year really created this trickle-down effect that I spoke about in the last debate. And I think that being able to have a close relationship with the other people on exec will really ensure that the rest of the body will be able to look up to the executive board and be able to approach them and have a resource that is approachable. I think that the issue last year was that there was no approachable board because it didn't seem like there was a board, even for our cabinet. Really, the most effective board on the UA is cabinet in this situation because we were not able to approach the executive board with our issues, and we were able to follow up with projects that they worked on, because a lot of them were cabinet members as well the past year, and to ensure that they're being cohesive and that they're working together is going to help us work on projects for our committees.
I think the issue last year or this past year was not necessarily a lack of vision. I think Dan Burnick had a great vision for what the UA could do. I think the issue was execution. Right? He did not execute the way that maybe he could have, or maybe he should. I'm not going to comment on him or anything else. I'm going to say primarily on that question that it's all about efficacy. At the end of the day, you can be united and do nothing, right? But you can also be working toward actually changing issues, and whether that is through a process of debate that maybe sacrifices a little bit of unity for more efficacy. I'll take efficacy every single day of the week and twice on Sunday. I can't possibly imagine student government that actually says it represents a student body and that actually says it does a good job and that doesn't promote efficacy over unity. So I'll always stand on that side.
I mean, like I said, I definitely agree that there are both sides. They're both really important. But it's evident that there was no communication between the members of the executive board last year, and that was really the underlying issue, and not having any project completion. And although a lot of these issues that we've talked about are extremely important to campus, they're relevant to the projects that we work on within the committees. And if we don't have this cohesion and this executive board to rely on, those projects and those issues are not going to be addressed where the projects are actually worked on in the UA, and that's in the committee system.
Our last questioner, there she is, thank you.
Sorry, I awkwardly moved behind.
That's okay.
This issue has remained kind of untouched, so this question is going to seem like out of nowhere, but the UA has never really taken any stand on the mental health of students and how the university can play a role in that. I mean, I'm running for SAS rep because I'm personally motivated about these things, and I was just wondering if either of you had any sort of initiatives in mind relating to the mental health of students.
Sure. Okay, I think the primary issue is CAPS funding and really expanding that, right? Because I think one of the primary problems that we see is that one, they're either the people who work at CAPS are either too busy, they don't give enough individual attention, which you really need to say you can properly do mental health right. And second is I've even heard some complaints about just the general attitude of the people that might work there sometimes. Those are all systemic problems that I think we have to fix. And I know now that sort of we're moving through a moment of sort of austerity within the university, I think it's clear to make this an issue that is much more, is much greater than just fiscal. If it's about student health, we pay for that, we need that. We can't have a cohesive student body without having proper student health. So bringing that issue to the administration, I think would be a major step in actually improving student health on campus and educating freshmen on always, falling back on that as a resource is a really, really important issue.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that CAPS funding is an issue. There aren't enough hired staff that can support the mental health issues that are present on campus. But also it's really important to note that there are a lot of different cultural centers and resources besides CAPS that are available. For example, I do know that the cultural centers hire specific people who are trained psychologists to be able to work with these student organizations and these students who have mental health issues, and to be able to educate students on these resources that are already available in addition to CAPS. I think CAPS is really the default for anyone who has any issues, but to emphasize that there are other issues present, other resources present on campus is really key. And I'm actually very familiar with one in particular. I work at the LGBT Center. We have a hired staff member, Rebecca Shep, who is actually a psychologist and worked with these types of issues, and to be able to increase accessibility and the knowledge of these resources besides CAPS is really important, in addition to obviously making sure that CAPS has funding as well.
I think about highlighting the role of RAs and GAs, in daily life, because they have the closest contact with people, right? That's an element that can be worked through just having better conversation with the house deans. And then the last point, I think, is working more closely than we have in the past with the Department of Psychology. We have the best Department of Psychology in the world at Penn. There are many students who are looking for doctorates, and they all have to go through a process if they want a psychology degree, practice psychotherapy. Why not practice on actual Penn students? They have to do it right. Let's do it right with actual Penn students.
All right, that brings us to the end of the second vice presidential debate. So thank you guys. Thank you to the audience as well for some really good questions. We'll now move into Abe's portion, which will be more of a question and answer. We do have a few questions from our co-sponsors. Okay, who started with the opening? Sorry about that.
All right, so I'll say it again. I'm not a debater, so I really appreciate that you guys listen to me, even though I might have a little ums and whatnot. But I definitely want to emphasize the fact that I do have a lot of tangible projects that I've already worked on and I want to continue on working on. Just one that I want to highlight real quickly. Penn Preview Days activities affair that we've been working on the Penn Preview Days committee. Jordan Holmes right here is actually on the committee. And those are types of things that I want to continue doing. Also working on projects such as a mural that Penn's campus doesn't have a mural. I want to emphasize the fact that we should definitely have a mural on campus. But also my relationships that I've already built through the minority organizations and the relationships I've built through the UA and through the executive board and the cabinet, the other cabinet members. And I want to emphasize that those connections are really important to be able to have a more effective meeting at steering and to be able to serve the student needs and the student body with whatever issues they want to bring up to the UA and to ensure that those issues are being met and met where needed.
You'll have to forgive me. I feel a little bit more, introspective tonight than I kind of wanted to. The Greek philosopher Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and I will move the world." I'm not trying to put myself in the role of Archimedes. But I do say this. I have never held a leadership position within the UA. I've never been an exec. I've never been on the cabinet. And that decision was not mine. It was never mine. But I can tell you this. As someone who has served as a general body member, I have never lost, nor will I lose, the same level of passion that I bring to the UA every single day, the amount of time and effort that I put into it this year and last year to understand the problems that face the student body. So I do say, like Archimedes did, give me a place to stand and I will move the world. I will try and change as much as I can this student government and make it work for you and by you. And I mean that. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Sorry, but anyone could have stopped me and no one did, so we're all...
Yeah, it's all our fault.
It's equal, it's equal. Okay, so we'll be moving on to the presidential question and answer, as I previously mentioned. If we could please keep it quiet so we can begin with the questions, thank you. Yes, you do get an opening statement, yes. It's a minute.
We're not skipping that one, or?
No, okay. We're doing the opening statement.
Thanks, Alec. Tell me when to do.
Whenever you're ready.
Oh, thank you, Alec. Thank you to all the hosts. Thank you, Mia, and thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Missions or functions. We provide services, we provide funding, and we advocate. So we sort of outsource the funding work to SAC, which they do it pretty well, so we're good. Keep it up, Jen. The services are more relevant to individual students, so that's probably not what you want to hear me talk about tonight. And we really are here to talk about advocacy, which is a really important thing, and it's something we're able to do because we have access to administrators. We're in a position where we can affect change, whether it's through our seats on University Council or through meetings that we're able to get with administrators. We can move issues forward and make a difference. So I welcome questions on that topic. And
Okay, we'll begin with a question from PQ. What do you know about Title IX and how it impacts women at the university? How will you as president help to reinforce the protections and considerations given under Title IX?
So as I understand it, which I could be wrong, I've never actually read Title IX, it focuses on athletics. So we're looking at athletics amongst other things. We're looking at sports teams and women playing sports on representation having the same number of athletes. It also looks at a number of other issues, including academics and the student body having a fair breakdown in numbers. So looking at engineering, where we actually have less female students than we do in some of the other schools, and definitely less than males. I know my girlfriend's actually a female engineer. She's a senior in CBE, and so she's been in classes where the majority of her classmates have all been males, and the teams that she's working on for the senior design project, it's all male, and that environment is something that she finds problematic. And I find a little troubling. In the college, we actually have a much better balance. It's competition. We have a much better balance, and I'm happy to see that. And I think Penn has been making strides in that and complying with the law, but we have to look at having diversity within the individual schools.
Okay, the next question is from Prism. What do you see as the next steps for making the lack of space for religious students known to administrators?
Sure. So I'd actually like to see religious life as a focus topic for University Council in the coming year. I've already started discussions with the administrators in the Secretary's office who set that agenda in consultation with University Council steering, and I will use that seat to advocate for that.
The next question comes from Skew. In general, what steps can be taken to increase the amount of communication and interaction between students and different members of the administration?
Sure. Just because of the nature of the question, I'm going to speak specifically to the Provost Office and the Deans, which are academic programs, which is the administrators that SKU works with most closely, and the UA's Academic Affairs Committee works with as well. So I'd like to see the Dean Advisory Boards first meet together and coordinate initiatives that they could push together through the individual deans. SKU and the UA President both sit on the Council of Undergraduate Deans. There are some projects that are best pushed through there, and there are some projects that are best pushed through the individual deans. Coordinating between these different groups can help us present a consistent message. It will help us actually impress administrators with our coordination and make them sure that we're really on top of this and have covered all the different angles. Making sure that we're bringing these forward in a professional manner is the first step to getting any initiatives and changes from an academic side made.
Okay. A question submitted from Poco. How will you address the issue of rising facilities costs for big events, an issue of concern to many student groups, but especially political groups attempting to bring big-name speakers to campus?
Sure. This is something that Jen Chiquette and I have actually been emailing with people from the Executive Vice President's office about. We're looking to set up some sort of facilities
committee to discuss this issue and see if we can make changes going forward.
Okay. The Lambda Alliance asks, how experienced are you in working on and engaging with LGBTQ issues?
Before I came to Penn, I knew very little about LGBTQ issues, and I've learned a lot in my time here. The first time I collaborated with the Lambda Alliance was when I was working on the Faculty Diversity Action Plan, which I sort of helped coordinate the UA's side of that as Academic Affairs Committee Director. More recently, I worked to introduce the Preferred Names Initiative to the UA, where we actually worked to get a broad base of support for this initiative, including not only LGBT groups like Lambda, but also international students and religious students. I look forward to collaborating with Lambda in the future.
Okay. The Transfer Student Organization asks, what steps can you take to help integrate transfer students into the Penn community and to help erase transfer stigma?
Well, one thing to recognize is that transfer students are not freshmen. When they're coming in, they're required to buy freshman meal plans, which is a problem. Now, I understand for financial reasons that dining is not going to be able to exempt them from buying meal plans. Providing an all dining dollar option would be a big step forward in allowing them to integrate more readily into the wider upperclassmen community. That's one place we could start.
Okay. A question from the United Minorities Council. What kind of work or initiatives are you planning to do with the UMC or other 5B groups?
Sure. The Faculty Diversity Action Plan is actually something that's still ongoing. If you look, LGBT groups were not actually mentioned once in the individual schools plans that was originally proposed. Lambda's had a lot of success in getting Wharton to change this, but that's something we have to consider looking at going forward. Also, this issue of student retention is something that hasn't really been looked at and needs to. I'd like to condemn Josh, actually, for the work that he's been doing with UMOJA on this issue, but it's something that we need to advocate for to make sure we have the resources to support students who may be struggling in their classes.
Okay. The AIS asks, how would you promote greater collaboration between domestic and international students at Penn?
So when you first come into Penn as an international student, which 11% or 12%, depending on the year, of the school is international, you actually are very easily stigmatized, whether it's through your name or through the way you look and the accent you're speaking with. And you can tell who's an international student. And as that population grows, because we are a global university increasingly, we have to make sure that we're taking steps to make that accommodation much easier. So the first step is 5 years from now, I'd like to see the university follow through on what they've said would be reasonable in making the Preferred Names Initiative cover international students as well. I understand there's timelines with that, but we're going to make sure that stays the priority. International students, encouraging them to run for the UA is something that we've already started. There has actually not been an international student in the UA this past year. I hope to see that change.
Okay. And our last question from the co-sponsor comes from the Latino Coalition. What have been some major turning points in the course of student activism in Penn's campus?
Sure. So I think this was referenced earlier by the vice presidential candidates. When I was a freshman, the DREAM Act resolution was brought before the UA. In its first rendition, it actually failed. It was something that was far beyond the guidelines that we're comfortable operating within, and we didn't pass it. I was not one of the authors of that. What happened during the next week is I reached out to the authors and we rewrote the DREAM Act within certain guidelines that would eventually evolve into, didn't rewrite the DREAM Act, we wrote the DREAM Act resolution. That would eventually evolve into political guidelines. I wish I had that power, but it would eventually evolve into the political guidelines we've been using to this day. That was a turning point for the UA in terms of addressing these issues.
Questions from the audience?
This question was submitted beforehand by SPEC. As a result of the rising cost of facilities, both SAC and SPEC's budgets will be increasingly stretched in order to maintain their respective current levels of programming. Given our relatively low bargaining power with international labor unions, what steps would you take to avoid a decrease in the level of future programming?
Sure. So one thing that I'd like to commend Jake Schuster and the Budget Committee for doing is how they've examined every single dollar the UA is spending and really been cutting down on the amount we spend. You could come in, welcome. And really cutting down on the amount that we're spending on student government. I point to the 18% cut that the UA has taken in its budget for the coming year. One way we did that is by not printing our meeting packets anymore. So encouraging people to go green in that way, in a way that it could actually save money, is a small thing that we could do to help. Ultimately, we're going to have to talk to the university about what costs we can bear and what costs they're willing to absorb. I could just talk, but Well, Alec.
Well, if that's the case, we could just move into a closing statement, but there's a question.
This is a question from Assembly of International Students. What measure will you take to promote greater integration and collaboration between domestic and international students at Penn?
Sure. So as I
believe we asked that
mentioned
question.
earlier on that question,
What, didn't we ask that? I believe we
Yes.
asked that question already. Yeah. Sorry. Any other questions from the audience?
So both the candidates have been taken, as we heard, want to take a good stance on advocacy. So how do you see yourself working with either one of the two candidates as they express a similar opinion on that?
I see myself working very well with both of the two candidates. They've both been advocates on the UA for the issues they're passionate about, and I think they would both make excellent vice presidents. They each have different ideas which they explain to you. I don't think I'm the person who can explain their ideas best.
If there are no more questions, I'll give you a minute for a closing statement.
Sure.
But please stop me if there are. No? Okay.
Well, one thing I want to say, because there's something that I know was asked earlier for the vice presidential candidates, but is very important to me, is regard to female leadership in the UA, which is something we have to promote and encourage. There can be no glass ceiling permitted in the UA. That's something we have to move away from, and that's something we need to change. Now, the position was called chair. There were 6 female chairs over the course of the years leading up to our transition. So I'll be the first president, hopefully, if all goes well. I'll be the 4th president, but so we don't have that much data there, but I'd like to see us get a female president at some point in the future. Some of the other branches have been leading us on this charge. You currently as a female chair, SAC does as well. We have to move towards that point. There are a number of female leaders I'd like to highlight for the work that they've done. Joyce Kim this past year as secretary should definitely play a leadership role. Danielle Golub has been doing amazing work with facilities, and she should be playing a role. Tiffany Zhu, I'd like to see her play a larger role than she's played in the past. She's been a director of our Dining Sustainability Facilities Committee, which are some of the top issues that the DP identified for the UA to address. And also Pratusha Gupta, who's one of the rising freshmen in the UA, who should be playing a leadership role next year on the UA. This is something I would like to change going forward, and I hope that we can move forward together on this.
Thank you. All right, that concludes the UA debates for the 2013 election cycle. Any feedback would be very much appreciated, so please reach out to Kat or myself with any feedback either now or later over email.
Yeah, thank you everybody. So remember my email is education@penn-int.edu.